Hello, chaps. Welcome to the Crazy Man That's Not Actually Crazy Murders People in an Effort to Send His Bastard Uncle to Hell podcast. Yes, that's its official name, trademarked and everything. I'm your host, Jake Westerman.
And the other handsome guy, I believe Joaquin Barboza.
And today, our dear listeners,
We will be discussing lines 63 to 83 from Act 5, Scene 1 of Hamlet.
yes, and as the end of the play comes closer and closer, the plot becomes thicker and thicker.
But before we start, how about some context? Early in Scene 1 of Act 5, two grave diggers are discussing over whether the person they are digging a grave deserves a Christian burial. After quite a long debate, they eventually decide that the person in question does deserve a burial. The Christian one, that is. And the gravedigger continues with his work. That is when Hamlet and Horatio enter the play and where tonight's podcast starts.
And without further ado, here's the passage.
In youth when I did love, methought it was very sweet to contract all the time. For my behove, oh methought there was nothing on me.
Has this fellow no feeling of his business? He sings at grave making.
Custom hath made it him a property of business.
'Tis even so. The hand of little employment half the daintier sense.
But age with his daily steps have clawed me in his clutch, and have shipped me into the land as I have never been such.
Skull has a tongue in it, and could sing once. How the knave jaws it to the ground as if it were Quain's jawbone that did the first murder. This might be the pate of a politician which this ass now overreaches. One that would circumvent God, might it not?
Aye, my lord.
Okay, now that the passage has been superbly acted out by yours truly, some more background information is that Ophelia, being understandably upset by her lover murdering her father Polonius, drowns herself. Bit of a yikes. Hamlet and Horatio then happen to stumble upon her grave and overhear the gravedigger singing while digging. Hamlet and Horatio lament and discuss this for a short time, which is actually what the passage covered, until the king, queen, and Laertes show up. Needless to say, things get a tad bit messy. Hamlet, overhearing the new characters, finds out that this grave is actually Ophelia's, and he then reveals himself to Claudius, Gertrude, and Laertes. Laertes, knowing of his father's murder by Hamlet, briefly grapples with Hamlet before being split up by the king and queen and then going their separate ways.
Right. So what essentially happened in the passage was that in Act 5, Scene 1, lines 63 to 83, was the moment when Hamlet and Horatio come across a gravedigger. The gravedigger is doing what he does best, which, if you can guess from the passage, was digging a grave. But there is an issue at hand. Hamlet and Horatio notice that the gravedigger is singing about death, which offends the two. They are offended by the singing because they believe that no person, regardless of who they are, should be buried by a gravedigger who is singing, because it brings dishonor to the burial.
Yep, and digging deeper, no pun intended, into the passage, one will realize that the song sung is actually an allusion to Richard Tottle's Miscellany in 1557, entitled The Aged Lover Renounceth Love. The title itself complements the themes of Love and Hamlet very well, especially considering the relationship of Hamlet and Ophelia, how Hamlet became or got perceived as mad due to the spite of the rejection of Ophelia's love, or Hamlet's love by Ophelia. Also, Hamlet, in a sense, has renounced love in a goal, like in his grand goal, his grand quest to kill King Claudius. Also, when Hamlet sees the gravedigger dig up the skull, he laments on who or what the skull could have been when it was alive. And he, interestingly, mentions that it could have been a politician. I find this very intriguing due to its foreshadowing and recalling nature. If you recall, most of the deaths, besides mainly Ophelia, have or will be politicians. King Hamlet was obviously a politician. Polonius was a politician. And Claudius and Hamlet, who are foreshadowed to die, are also politicians. And besides the song, there's a much more painfully obvious allusion that comes in the form of the biblical allusion to the story of Cain and Abel. Hamlet also mentions circumventing God, which Cain obviously did by killing Abel, Claudius did by killing King Hamlet, and the Gravedigger does now to a less extent by showing an almost comical lack of reverence for the dead. On a similar note, once again, no pun intended, the circumvention of God also implies supernatural elements, which Hamlet is no stranger to, especially recalling the ghost of old King Hamlet. This line works on multiple levels, and I believe one of those levels is as a callback to the undead king.
That's great and all, but in the words of presidential candidate Joe Biden himself, will you shut up, man?
Okay, fair. I did talk for a long time, but don't you want to know what happens next?
I have to because Miss Raymond is forcing me to, but yes, Jake Westerman, I would love to know what happens next.
Well, too bad. Sucks to suck, kid. You'll have to wait for the next episode of the podcast. So, you want to tell the fans when the next episode comes out, Joaquin?
No, Jake, we're being canceled. We've run out of funding and I'm declaring bankruptcy.
All right. Good stuff. As always, this has been Jake Westerman.
And Joaquin Barboza.
Thanks for listening.
And please donate to support this program by giving money to me.
Have a good night, everyone.